Marcus Thompson stood in line at the community center, holding his 7-year-old daughter Emma's hand while balancing a stack of registration forms. The annual Veterans Day fundraiser was always crowded, but this year seemed especially busy. Emma tugged at his sleeve, pointing toward the balloon arch near the entrance. "Daddy, can we get face painting after we sign up for the fun run?" she asked, her eyes bright with excitement. Marcus smiled down at her, adjusting the baseball cap that covered his graying hair. "Sure, sweetheart. Let's get through this line first." The community center buzzed with activity. Local veterans, active military families, and civilians mingled throughout the large hall. Red, white, and blue decorations hung from every available surface, and the smell of barbecue drifted in from the outdoor cooking area. Marcus had been coming to this event for 3 years now, ever since he and Emma had moved to this small Virginia town after his divorce was finalized. Life as a single father had its challenges, but Marcus had found his rhythm. His job at the local hardware store provided enough income to cover their modest apartment, and the flexible schedule allowed him to be there when Emma got off the school bus each afternoon. The other parents at Emma's school knew him as the quiet guy who volunteered for field trip chaperoning and always brought homemade cookies to class parties. Nobody knew about the 12 years he had spent in special operations. Nobody knew about the missions that still visited him in dreams some nights. Marcus preferred it that way. He had built a peaceful life for himself and Emma, far removed from the intensity of his military past. "Next," called the volunteer at the registration table. Marcus stepped forward, Emma still gripping his hand. The elderly woman behind the table smiled warmly at them both. "Good morning. Are you here for the fun run registration?" "Yes, ma'am. Both of us for the 5-kilometer route," Marcus replied, pulling out his wallet. As he filled out the paperwork, Emma wandered a few steps away to examine a display of military photos that local veterans had contributed. Marcus kept one eye on her while completing the forms, writing Marcus Thompson in neat block letters across the top. The registration process was straightforward until the volunteer reached a particular line on the form. She squinted at something Marcus had written, then looked up at him with curiosity. "I'm sorry, but I can't quite make out what you wrote here under branch of service. Could you clarify?" Marcus glanced at the form. He had simply written Navy in small, unassuming letters. "Navy, ma'am. I served in the Navy." The woman nodded and made a note. But before she could continue, a deep voice spoke up behind Marcus. "Well, I'll be damned. Another sailor in landlocked Virginia." Marcus turned to see a tall man in his 50s approaching their table. Even in civilian clothes, everything about the man screamed military officer. His posture was perfectly straight, his gray hair was cut in a precise fade, and his handshake, when he extended it toward Marcus, was firm and confident. "Admiral James Richardson," the man introduced himself. "Retired, of course. I couldn't help but overhear that you served in the Navy." Marcus accepted the handshake, noting the Admiral's practiced assessment of him. It was the same look Marcus had seen countless times during his military career, an experienced officer sizing up a subordinate. "Marcus Thompson. Pleasure to meet you, sir." "The pleasure's mine. What did you do in the Navy, if you don't mind me asking?" This was always the tricky part. Marcus had developed a standard response for these situations, vague enough to be truthful without inviting further questions. "Special warfare," Marcus said simply. "Nothing too exciting." Admiral Richardson's eyebrows raised slightly. In military circles, special warfare could mean many things, but coming from someone who looked like Marcus, lean, alert, and carrying himself with unconscious precision, it usually meant something significant. "Special warfare, eh? What unit?" Marcus hesitated for just a moment. Emma had returned to his side, now tugging on his other hand and whispering something about being hungry. The normal chaos of family life provided a convenient distraction from questions he preferred not to answer in detail. Various assignments, sir. You know how it is. But Admiral Richardson didn't seem ready to let the conversation end there. His years of experience reading people told him there was more to Marcus Thompson than met the eye. The way the man stood, the way his eyes constantly scanned the room even while talking, the careful precision of his words. These were all signs of someone who had operated at a very high level. "Indeed I do," the Admiral replied. "Well, it's always good to meet a fellow veteran. Are you planning to participate in the memorial ceremony later?" "We're just here for the fun run," Marcus said, gathering up the completed paperwork. "Emma's been looking forward to it all week." Admiral Richardson looked down at the little girl, who was now examining his shoes with the serious concentration that only 7-year-olds could muster. "And who might this young lady be?" "This is my daughter, Emma," Marcus said, his voice softening noticeably. "Emma, can you say hello to Admiral Richardson?" Emma looked up from her shoe inspection and offered a small wave. "Hi. Are you really an admiral? Like in the pirate movies?" Both men chuckled, and Admiral Richardson knelt down to Emma's eye level. "Not quite like the pirate movies, sweetheart. I was in the real Navy, which means I helped keep the ocean safe for everyone." Emma nodded solemnly, apparently satisfied with this explanation. "Daddy was in the Navy, too. He says he used to ride on big boats." "Did he now?" Admiral Richardson glanced up at Marcus with renewed interest. "Big boats, you say?" Marcus felt a familiar tension in his shoulders. He had worked hard to build a simple, quiet life, and conversations like this threatened to complicate things. Not because he was ashamed of his service, quite the opposite, but because explaining his background usually led to questions he couldn't or didn't want to answer. "We should probably get moving," Marcus said, taking Emma's hand again. "Lots to see before the race starts." But Admiral Richardson stood up slowly, his mind clearly working through something. There were details about Marcus that didn't quite add up to a standard Navy career. The way he moved, the way he observed his surroundings, even the way he deflected questions. It all suggested someone with specialized training. "Mr. Thompson, if you don't mind me asking, what was your rate in the Navy?" Rate was Navy terminology for job specialty. It was a question that any real Navy veteran would understand and answer without hesitation. Marcus knew he couldn't deflect this one without seeming suspicious. "So," Marcus replied quietly. Admiral Richardson's expression changed immediately. "So" stood for Special Operator, which meant Marcus had been a Navy SEAL. Suddenly, everything about the man made perfect sense. His physical condition, despite being in his 40s, his constant situational awareness, his reluctance to discuss his service in detail. "I see," Admiral Richardson said, his tone becoming more respectful. "Well, that explains a few things." Marcus could see that the Admiral had connected the dots. There was no point in continuing to deflect now, but he also didn't want to turn this into a long conversation about his military career, especially with Emma present. "Yes, sir. Like I said, nothing too exciting." Admiral Richardson almost smiled at that. Navy SEALs had a reputation for understatement, often describing the most dangerous missions as interesting or routine. Calling 12 years in special operations nothing too exciting was exactly what he would expect from someone with that background. "Of course," Admiral Richardson replied. "Well, I hope you both enjoy the event." As they walked away from the registration table, Emma skipping alongside him, Marcus thought the conversation was over. He was wrong. The fun run wouldn't start for another hour, so Marcus and Emma explored the various booths and displays set up around the community center. Emma was fascinated by a military vehicle display where local National Guard members were explaining the different features of a Humvee to curious children. While Emma climbed into the driver's seat under careful supervision, Marcus found himself studying the crowd. It was an old habit, one that he had never quite shaken. Even in the safest environments, part of his mind automatically cataloged exits, assessed potential threats, and noted the positions of security personnel. There weren't many actual threats at a Community Veterans Day celebration, but Marcus noticed several things that interested him. A group of active-duty Marines from the nearby base were running a recruiting booth. A handful of older veterans, probably Vietnam era, had gathered near a memorial display, sharing stories and comparing service records. And Admiral Richardson was making his way through the crowd, stopping to chat with various people. Marcus watched the Admiral's interactions from a distance. The man was clearly well-respected and well-connected. People approached him throughout the morning, from other veterans to local politicians to community leaders. Admiral Richardson seemed to know everyone, and everyone seemed to know him. "Daddy, look!" Emma called from the Humvee. "I'm driving." Marcus smiled and walked over to take some pictures with his phone. Emma posed seriously behind the wheel, her small hands gripping the steering wheel with determination. "Very impressive, sweetheart. Think you want to join the Army when you grow up?" "No way," Emma replied without hesitation. "I want to be a veterinarian, but maybe I could drive one of these to help animals." The National Guard soldier supervising the display laughed. "That's the best reason I've heard all day for wanting to drive military vehicles." As Emma climbed down from the Humvee, Marcus noticed Admiral Richardson approaching them again. This time, the Admiral wasn't alone. He was accompanied by a woman in her 30s wearing a press badge and carrying a small recording device. "Mr. Thompson," Admiral Richardson called out, "I'd like to introduce you to Sarah Martinez from the local newspaper. She's doing a story about veterans in our community." Marcus felt his stomach tighten slightly. Media attention was the last thing he wanted, especially given his background. Special operations veterans often maintained low profiles for obvious reasons, and Marcus had worked hard to blend into civilian life without drawing attention to himself. "Nice to meet you," Marcus said politely, but he didn't extend his hand for a shake. "I'm afraid we're not really interview material. Just here to enjoy the event with my daughter." Sarah Martinez smiled warmly, but Marcus could see the journalist's instincts at work behind her eyes. Admiral Richardson had obviously told her something that sparked her interest. "I understand completely," she said. "I'm just doing some general background interviews about local veterans and their transition to civilian life. Nothing too formal. Admiral Richardson mentioned that you served in special operations." Marcus glanced at the Admiral, who had the grace to look slightly apologetic. Clearly, the man hadn't been able to resist sharing what he had learned about Marcus's background. "I served in the Navy," Marcus replied carefully. "But like I told the Admiral, nothing too exciting." Emma, who had been listening to the conversation with the intense focus that children often brought to adult discussions they didn't quite understand, suddenly piped up. "Daddy has lots of medals in a box at home, and sometimes he has bad dreams about the big boats." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. Children had a way of sharing information that adults preferred to keep private. Sarah Martinez's journalistic instincts clearly sharpened at this revelation. "Medals?" she asked gently. "What kind of medals?" Before Marcus could deflect the question, Admiral Richardson spoke up. "Sarah, perhaps this isn't the best time or place for an interview. Mr. Thompson and his daughter are here to enjoy the festivities." Marcus was grateful for the intervention, but he could see that both the Admiral and the reporter had filed away Emma's comment for future reference. In their minds, a Navy Special Operations veteran with a collection of medals hidden away at home was definitely someone worth learning more about. "Of course," Sarah agreed, but she handed Marcus a business card. "If you ever change your mind about sharing your story, please give me a call. I think the community would be very interested in hearing from local heroes." Marcus pocketed the card without looking at it. "Thank you, but I'm really not hero material. Just a guy trying to raise his daughter." As Sarah walked away, Admiral Richardson remained behind. He watched her go, then turned back to Marcus with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said quietly, "the way you handle yourself, the way you deflect attention, it reminds me of some people I worked with during my career. People who operated in very specialized roles." Marcus didn't respond immediately. Emma had wandered over to a face-painting booth, captivated by the elaborate butterfly design being applied to another child's cheek. "Admiral," Marcus said finally, "with all due respect, some stories are better left untold." "I understand that," Admiral Richardson replied, "but sometimes sharing those stories can help other veterans who are struggling with their own transitions." It was a fair point, and Marcus knew it. He had been fortunate in his adjustment to civilian life, largely because he had Emma to focus on. Not every veteran was so lucky. But Marcus also knew that his particular story involved classified operations and sensitive information that couldn't be shared publicly. "I appreciate the sentiment," Marcus said, "but my situation is a bit more complicated than most." Admiral Richardson nodded slowly. In his years of military service, he had encountered enough classified operations and black projects to understand what Marcus was implying. "Fair enough," he said, "but if you ever want to talk, veteran to veteran, I'm around. Sometimes it helps to speak with someone who understands the weight of service." Before Marcus could respond, Emma came running back over to them, her face painted with an elaborate rainbow butterfly design. "Daddy, look! Isn't it beautiful?" Marcus knelt down to admire her face painting, grateful for the distraction from the increasingly personal conversation. "It's absolutely gorgeous, sweetheart. You look like a magical butterfly princess." Emma giggled and spun around, making her sundress twirl. "Can we get something to eat now? I'm really hungry." "Of course," Marcus said, standing up. He turned to Admiral Richardson. "It was nice meeting you, sir. Enjoy the rest of the event." As they walked toward the food vendors, Marcus hoped that would be the end of his interaction with the Admiral. He was wrong about that, too. The barbecue line was long but moved quickly. Emma chatted happily about everything she had seen, from the military vehicles to the face painting to a magic show that was scheduled for later in the afternoon. Marcus listened with half his attention while keeping the other half focused on the crowd around them. It was another old habit from his military days. Even in safe environments, Marcus found himself automatically assessing potential threats and escape routes. Today, surrounded by families and veterans at a community celebration, there were no real threats to worry about. But the mental discipline of constant awareness had become so ingrained that Marcus couldn't turn it off completely. They found an empty picnic table near the back of the eating area and settled in with their plates of barbecue and sides. Emma immediately started working on her corn on the cob, getting butter all over her face in the process. "Daddy," she said between bites, "why did that man want to talk to you so much?" Marcus wiped butter off her chin with a napkin before answering. "Some people are just curious about what other people did before they lived here. But you don't like talking about the big boats, do you?" Kids were incredibly perceptive, Marcus reflected. Emma had picked up on his discomfort even though he thought he had hidden it well. "It's not that I don't like talking about it," Marcus said carefully. "It's just that some things are private, and some things happened a long time ago. Sometimes it's better to focus on what's happening now." Emma nodded seriously, as if this explanation made perfect sense to her 7-year-old worldview. "Like how you don't like talking about Mommy moving away?" The question caught Marcus off guard. Emma rarely brought up her mother's departure, and when she did, it usually meant she had been thinking about it more than usual. "That's a little different, sweetheart," Marcus said. "But yes, sometimes it's easier to focus on the good things we have right now instead of thinking too much about things that make us sad." Emma seemed satisfied with this answer and returned her attention to her lunch. Marcus, however, found himself thinking about the parallels Emma had drawn. In both cases, his military service and his failed marriage, there were aspects of his past that he preferred not to discuss in detail. His ex-wife Jennifer had never really understood the demands of his military career, especially during his years in special operations. The irregular deployments, the inability to discuss his work, the stress of dangerous missions. It had all taken a toll on their relationship. When Emma was born, Marcus had hoped that becoming parents would help them reconnect. Instead, it had highlighted their differences even more. Jennifer wanted stability, predictability, and a husband who could talk about his job at dinner parties. Marcus's career had offered none of those things. The final straw had come during Emma's second year, when Marcus was deployed for 4 months on a mission he couldn't discuss. When he returned, Jennifer had already made up her mind about wanting a divorce. The custody arrangement had been relatively amicable, considering the circumstances. Jennifer had moved to California for a new job, and Marcus had taken an early retirement from the military to focus on raising Emma. It had been the right decision, even though it meant leaving behind the only career he had ever known. "Daddy, can we go watch the magic show after lunch?" Emma's question brought Marcus back to the present moment. "Absolutely. What time does it start?" "In 15 minutes, at the big stage." Marcus checked his watch and nodded. "Perfect timing. Let's finish up here and head over." As they cleaned up their lunch trash, Marcus noticed Admiral Richardson at a nearby table, engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation with several other older men. All of them had the bearing of military veterans, and Marcus caught fragments of their discussion about veterans' benefits and support programs. It reminded Marcus of why events like this were important, beyond just the community celebration aspect. Many veterans struggled with the transition to civilian life, and gatherings like this provided opportunities for networking, support, and connection with others who understood their experiences. Marcus had been fortunate in his own transition, partly because he had been forced to focus all his energy on being a good father to Emma. She had given him a clear sense of purpose and direction when he might otherwise have struggled to find his place in civilian society. The magic show was set up on a small stage near the community center's main entrance. By the time Marcus and Emma arrived, a crowd of children and parents had already gathered in front of the stage. They found a spot on the grass where Emma would have a good view. The magician was a middle-aged man in a colorful vest who clearly had years of experience entertaining children. He started with simple card tricks and gradually worked up to more elaborate illusions involving ropes, scarves, and a very patient rabbit named Mr. Whiskers. Emma was completely enchanted, gasping and clapping at each new trick. Marcus found himself enjoying the show too, partly because of Emma's obvious delight, and partly because it was refreshing to watch someone whose job was simply to create wonder and happiness. Halfway through the performance, Marcus became aware that someone had sat down on the grass next to him. He glanced over to see Admiral Richardson, who was watching the magic show with apparent interest. "Good show," the Admiral commented quietly, not wanting to disturb the performance. "Emma loves it," Marcus replied. "She's always been fascinated by magic." They watched in companionable silence for a few minutes as the magician made a series of colorful scarves disappear and reappear in increasingly unlikely places. Emma laughed delightedly when Mr. Whiskers produced a bouquet of flowers from his top hat. During a brief lull while the magician set up his next trick, Admiral Richardson spoke up again. "You know, I've been thinking about our conversation earlier." Marcus felt his shoulders tense slightly. "Oh?" "I spent most of my career in conventional Navy operations, but I worked closely with special operations communities during several deployments. I learned to recognize the signs of someone who's operated at that level." Marcus wasn't sure where this was leading, but he had a feeling he wasn't going to like it. "The thing is," Admiral Richardson continued, "most special operations veterans I've known have had a harder time with civilian transition than you seem to have had. You appear to have found a good balance." It was both an observation and a question. Marcus considered how to respond without getting drawn into a detailed discussion of his personal life. Having Emma to focus on made a big difference. Marcus said simply, "Gives you perspective on what really matters." Admiral Richardson nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. Still, I imagine there are aspects of your previous career that you miss." Before Marcus could respond, Emma turned around with excitement written all over her face. "Daddy, did you see that? He made the whole rabbit disappear." Marcus smiled at her enthusiasm. "I saw it. Pretty amazing, wasn't it?" "How do you think he did it?" "Magic," Marcus replied with mock seriousness. "Pure magic." Emma giggled and turned back to watch the rest of the show. Admiral Richardson seemed to take the hint that their conversation was over, at least for the moment. When the magic show ended, Emma wanted to meet Mr. Whiskers the rabbit. They waited in line with several other children, while the magician patiently allowed each child to pet the surprisingly calm bunny. "He's so soft," Emma whispered when it was her turn. "Do you think he knows he's magic?" "I think he knows he's special," Marcus replied, taking a photo of Emma gently stroking the rabbit's ears. As they walked away from the magic show area, Admiral Richardson fell into step beside them again. Marcus was beginning to realize that the man was quite persistent when something captured his interest. "The fun run starts in about 30 minutes, Admiral Richardson mentioned. "Are you both planning to participate?" "Absolutely," Emma answered before Marcus could respond. "Daddy runs with me every morning, so we're really good at it." "Every morning?" Admiral Richardson looked at Marcus with renewed interest. "That's quite a routine." Marcus shrugged. "Emma likes the exercise, and it's a good way to start the day." What he didn't mention was that the morning runs served multiple purposes beyond just exercise. They were part of the routine that helped Marcus maintain his physical and mental discipline. They also provided a structured activity that he and Emma could do together, strengthening their bond while keeping Marcus in the kind of physical condition that years of military training had conditioned him to maintain. "What's your usual pace?" Admiral Richardson asked. It was a casual question, but Marcus recognized it as another piece of information gathering. His running pace would be another indicator of his fitness level and, by extension, his military background. "We keep it easy when Emma's with me," Marcus replied diplomatically. "It's more about spending time together than setting speed records." Emma looked up at him with a mischievous grin. "Daddy can run really fast when he wants to. I've seen him." Admiral Richardson smiled at this revelation. "Have you now? When was that?" "Sometimes when we're running and Daddy sees something that worries him, he goes really fast to check it out," Emma explained matter-of-factly. "Like when we heard that loud noise in the park last month." Marcus remembered the incident Emma was referring to. They had been on their morning run when they heard what sounded like gunshots from the direction of the park's maintenance area. Marcus had instinctively moved toward the sound to assess the situation, leaving Emma with another jogger they knew while he investigated. It had turned out to be a maintenance worker using a nail gun on a shelter repair, but Marcus's immediate response had been pure military reflex, move toward the sound of potential trouble to assess and respond to threats. "I see," Admiral Richardson said, his tone suggesting that he understood the significance of Marcus's reaction better than Emma did. "We should probably head toward the starting line," Marcus said, eager to change the subject. Emma gets excited about being ready early for events like this. The fun run was organized by age groups, with children and their parents starting first, followed by serious runners who wanted to compete for prizes. Marcus and Emma lined up with the family groups, where the emphasis was on participation rather than competition. Admiral Richardson, Marcus noticed, had signed up for the competitive division. Despite being in his 50s, the Admiral appeared to be in excellent physical condition and was obviously taking the race seriously. "Good luck today," Admiral Richardson said as they parted ways toward their respective starting areas. Maybe we'll see each other at the finish line. Good luck to you too, sir, Marcus replied politely. As they waited for the race to begin, Emma bounced on her toes with nervous excitement. Daddy, do you think we'll win? We've already won, Marcus told her. We're here together, we're healthy enough to run, and we're supporting a good cause. Everything else is just bonus. Emma considered this philosophy for a moment, then nodded approvingly. That's a good way to think about it. The race director called for attention and explained the course, which would take participants through the community center parking lot, along a scenic path through the adjacent park, and back to the starting point. Safety volunteers would be stationed at key points along the route, and water stations would be available at the halfway point. Runners ready? The race director called out. Emma grabbed Marcus's hand, and they moved forward with the crowd of families toward the starting line. The morning sun had burned off the early clouds, and it promised to be a perfect day for running. The starting horn sounded, and the family groups began their run at a comfortable pace. Emma stayed close to Marcus's side, her shorter legs working hard to match his longer stride. Marcus adjusted his pace to make sure she could keep up without getting winded. The first part of the course took them through the community center parking lot, where volunteers cheered and directed runners toward the park entrance. Emma waved at every volunteer they passed, her face bright with excitement and exertion. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Marcus asked as they entered the tree-lined path through the park. Great, Emma panted. This is fun. The park path was beautiful in the morning light, with tall oak trees creating a canopy overhead and morning birds singing from the branches. Other family groups were spread out along the path, some moving faster, some slower, but everyone seemed to be enjoying the experience. Marcus found himself automatically scanning the wooded areas on either side of the path, another old habit from his military training. He wasn't expecting any threats in a suburban park during a community fun run, but the mental discipline of maintaining situational awareness had become second nature. About halfway through the course, they reached the water station where volunteers handed out small cups of water and sports drinks. Emma gratefully accepted a cup of water and drank it down quickly. Thank you, she said politely to the volunteer, a teenage girl wearing a local high school track team shirt. You're doing great, the volunteer replied enthusiastically. Keep it up. As they prepared to continue running, Marcus heard footsteps approaching rapidly from behind. He turned to see a man in his 30s jogging toward them, moving much faster than the family group pace. The man was wearing expensive running gear and appeared to be in excellent physical condition. Excuse me, the man called out as he approached. Are you Marcus Thompson? Marcus felt immediately alert. Random strangers didn't usually know his name at public events, especially when he had made an effort to keep a low profile. Yes, Marcus replied cautiously. Do we know each other? The man slowed to a stop next to them, breathing hard but not winded. Sorry to interrupt your run. I'm Dave Morrison, with the Department of Veterans Affairs. Admiral Richardson mentioned that I might find you here. Marcus's internal warning systems activated immediately. He didn't like the idea of Admiral Richardson discussing him with other people, especially government officials. Emma looked between the two men with curiosity. Sensing that this was an adult conversation she didn't quite understand. What can I do for you, Mr. Morrison? Marcus asked, politely but guardedly. I'm working on a program to connect veterans with community resources, Morrison explained. The Admiral mentioned that you might be someone we could feature in our outreach efforts. Marcus felt a familiar frustration rising. He had worked hard to build a quiet, private life for himself and Emma, and it seemed like Admiral Richardson was determined to drag him back into the spotlight. I appreciate the offer, Marcus said carefully, but I'm not really interested in any kind of public role. We're just here to enjoy the run. Morrison nodded, but Marcus could tell he wasn't ready to give up easily. I understand your hesitation. But sometimes sharing your story can help other veterans who are struggling with similar challenges. Emma tugged on Marcus's sleeve. Daddy, Are we going to keep running? I don't want to finish last. Marcus looked down at his daughter, grateful for the reminder of what was really important. You're absolutely right, sweetheart. Mr. Morrison, it was nice meeting you, but we need to finish this race. Of course, Morrison said. But here's my card, in case you change your mind. The work we're doing could really benefit from someone with your background. Marcus accepted the card without looking at it, stuffing it into his pocket next to the reporter's card he had received earlier. Thank you. As they resumed running, Emma looked up at Marcus with a confused expression. Why does everyone want to talk to you today? It was a perceptive question, and Marcus wasn't entirely sure how to answer it. Sometimes when people find out you used to be in the military, they get curious about your experiences. But you don't like talking about the big boats? Emma observed. No, I don't, Marcus admitted. Some things are better left in the past. They ran in comfortable silence for a while, focusing on maintaining their pace and enjoying the scenery. The park path wound through several different sections, including a small pond where ducks were swimming peacefully and a playground where Emma pointed out her favorite slide. As they approached the final stretch of the course, Marcus noticed that Admiral Richardson was already at the finish line, apparently having completed his competitive run. The Admiral was talking with several other people, including Sarah Martinez, the reporter from earlier. Marcus felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. Something about the way they were all gathered together suggested that this wasn't a casual conversation about the race results. Daddy, I can see the finish line, Emma exclaimed excitedly. Should we run faster? Let's finish strong, Marcus agreed, and they picked up their pace for the final 100 yards. Emma crossed the finish line with her arms raised in victory, grinning widely despite being out of breath. Marcus couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm and pride in completing her first organized run. We did it, Emma announced to anyone within hearing distance. We ran the whole way. A volunteer handed each of them a small participation medal and a bottle of water. Emma immediately put her medal on and admired how it looked hanging from the ribbon around her neck. Very impressive, Admiral Richardson said, approaching them with his small group of companions. How did you enjoy the course? It was beautiful, Emma replied before Marcus could answer. And we saw ducks. Ducks are always a highlight of any good race, Admiral Richardson agreed seriously. Marcus noticed that Sarah Martinez was holding her recording device again, and Dave Morrison from the VA was also part of the group. They had clearly been discussing him while he and Emma were completing the race. Mr. Thompson, Admiral Richardson said, I hope you don't mind, but I've been sharing some thoughts about veterans in our community with Sarah and Dave here. Your name came up as an example of successful transition to civilian life. Marcus did mind, actually, but he couldn't say so directly without seeming rude or ungrateful. Instead, he focused on Emma, who was showing her medal to anyone who would look at it. I'm flattered, Marcus said diplomatically, but like I mentioned earlier, I'm not really interested in any kind of public attention. That's exactly what makes your story so compelling, Sarah Martinez interjected. Most of the veterans we profile are looking for recognition or support, someone who's found their own way and is contributing quietly to the community. That's a different angle that our readers would find refreshing. Marcus understood what she was saying, but she was missing the point. It wasn't modesty that made him avoid publicity. It was necessity. His military background included classified operations and sensitive assignments that made public attention potentially problematic. I understand your perspective, Marcus said, but I have personal reasons for preferring to keep a low profile. Dave Morrison stepped forward. Mr. Thompson, I want to be clear that we're not looking for any details about classified operations or sensitive assignments. We're interested in the civilian transition aspect, how you've built a new life, how you've found purpose in parenthood, how you've integrated into the community. The fact that Morrison had mentioned classified operations suggested that Admiral Richardson had shared more about Marcus's background than Marcus was comfortable with. He made a mental note to have a frank conversation with the Admiral about discretion and privacy. "Daddy," Emma said, tugging on his sleeve again, "can we go see the award ceremony? They're giving out prizes for the winners." Marcus seized on the distraction. "Absolutely. Excuse us, but we don't want to miss the ceremony." As they walked away from the group, Marcus could hear them continuing their conversation behind him. He caught fragments about compelling human interest story and inspiring example of service and sacrifice. It made him uncomfortable to think that he had become the subject of their planning without his consent or participation. The award ceremony was set up near the main stage, where the magic show had been held earlier. A small crowd had gathered to watch, as the race director announced the winners in various age groups and categories. Emma was fascinated by the whole process, applauding enthusiastically for each winner, even though she didn't know any of them personally. Marcus found her genuine excitement and good sportsmanship endearing. "Ladies and gentlemen," the race director announced, "I'd also like to recognize all our family participants who completed the course together. You represent what this event is really about: community, family, and honoring service." Emma beamed as if the recognition was specifically for her, and Marcus supposed that, in a way, it was. They had participated as a family unit, supporting each other and enjoying the experience together. After the ceremony, they wandered back through the various booths and displays. Emma wanted to visit the face painting station again to see if they could add some enhancements to her butterfly design. While Emma was getting additional decorations added to her face painting, Marcus noticed Admiral Richardson approaching again, this time alone. "Mr. Thompson, I owe you an apology," the Admiral said without preamble. Marcus looked at him with surprise. "Sir?" "I got carried away with my enthusiasm for what you represent," Admiral Richardson explained. "I shared information about your background without thinking about the fact that you might have legitimate reasons for wanting to maintain privacy." Marcus felt some of his tension ease. At least the Admiral understood the problem his well-intentioned efforts had created. "I appreciate that, sir," Marcus said, "and I understand that your intentions were good. But yes, there are aspects of my background that make publicity complicated." Admiral Richardson nodded gravely. "I spent enough years in the Navy to understand the implications of what you're telling me. I should have been more thoughtful about that from the beginning." Emma finished getting her face painting enhanced and came skipping back over to them, now sporting additional rainbow colors and glitter in her butterfly design. "Look, Daddy, now I'm a super magical butterfly." "You certainly are," Marcus agreed, taking another photo with his phone. "The most magical butterfly in the whole park." Admiral Richardson watched this interaction with apparent interest, but when he spoke again, his tone was more thoughtful and measured than it had been earlier. "Mr. Thompson, I hope you'll consider that there might be ways to help other veterans without compromising your privacy or security. Sometimes the greatest service is done quietly, without fanfare." It was a more nuanced statement than Admiral Richardson had made before, and Marcus appreciated the recognition that his situation was more complex than standard veteran outreach efforts. "I'll consider that, sir," Marcus replied. "Thank you for understanding." As Admiral Richardson walked away, Emma looked up at Marcus with her head tilted in a gesture that reminded him strongly of her mother. "Why does that man keep talking to you about the big boats?" Marcus knelt down to Emma's eye level, thinking about how to explain the situation in terms a 7-year-old could understand. Sometimes when people find out that someone used to have an important job, they want that person to talk about it publicly. But some jobs are private, even after they're over. Emma nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "Like how you don't tell everyone about the time I broke your favorite mug because that's private family business?" Marcus smiled at the analogy. "Exactly like that, sweetheart. Some things are meant to stay private, even if they're not bad things. Okay, Emma said, apparently satisfied with this explanation. Can we go get some cotton candy now? The rest of the afternoon passed more peacefully. Marcus and Emma enjoyed the various activities without any more interruptions from Admiral Richardson or his associates. Emma won a small stuffed animal at a ring toss game, shared cotton candy with Marcus, and watched a demonstration by local emergency services personnel. As the event wound down in the late afternoon, Marcus felt like they had successfully navigated what could have been a much more complicated situation. Emma was tired but happy, carrying her stuffed animal and wearing her race medal with obvious pride. They were walking toward the parking lot when Admiral Richardson appeared one final time, but his approach this time was different. He was alone, and his manner was more casual and personal than it had been during their earlier encounters. "Mr. Thompson, I hope you both enjoyed the day." "We did," Marcus replied honestly. "It's a great community event." "Before you leave," Admiral Richardson said, "I wanted to ask you something just between veterans. Nothing for reporters or VA programs or any other kind of publicity." Marcus was intrigued despite himself. "What's that?" Admiral Richardson glanced around to make sure no one else was within hearing distance, then lowered his voice slightly. "In all my years of working with special operations personnel, I've learned that everyone has a call sign. It's usually something that captures who they are or what they're known for among their team members." Marcus felt his blood go cold. Call signs were deeply personal and often classified, especially for members of the most elite units. The fact that Admiral Richardson was asking about his suggested a level of knowledge about special operations culture that went beyond casual familiarity. "I'm curious," Admiral Richardson continued quietly, "what did your team members call you?" Emma was distracted by a butterfly that had landed on a nearby flower, giving Marcus a moment to consider his response. This was dangerous territory, and he wasn't sure why Admiral Richardson was pushing into it. "Sir, with all due respect, that's not something I discuss." Admiral Richardson nodded slowly, as if he had expected that answer. "I understand. But sometimes a call sign tells you everything you need to know about a person's character and capabilities." The way he said it suggested that Admiral Richardson might already know the answer to his question, which would mean he had access to information that shouldn't be easily available. Marcus felt a new level of wariness about the Admiral and his motives. "Is there something specific you're trying to tell me, sir?" Marcus asked directly. Before Admiral Richardson could answer, Emma came running back over to them, excitement radiating from her small frame. "Daddy, that butterfly had the exact same colors as my face painting. Do you think it recognized me as part of its family?" Marcus smiled at her imagination. "I think it probably did. Butterflies are very good at recognizing other magical creatures." Emma giggled and took Marcus's hand. "I'm ready to go home now. This was the best day ever, but I'm getting sleepy." Marcus looked back at Admiral Richardson, who seemed to understand that their conversation was over. "It was a pleasure meeting you both," Admiral Richardson said formally. "I hope we'll see you at next year's event." "I'm sure we'll be here," Marcus replied politely. As they walked away, Marcus found himself thinking about Admiral Richardson's final question. Call signs were indeed personal and revealing, but they were also supposed to be confidential, especially for members of the most sensitive units. Marcus's call sign had been Iron Ghost, earned during his second deployment when he had successfully infiltrated and extracted from a heavily defended compound without being detected. The name had stuck because of his ability to move through dangerous territory without leaving traces, appearing and disappearing like a specter made of steel. But that name, and the operations that had earned it, were part of a classified world that Marcus had left behind when he chose to become a full-time father. The fact that Admiral Richardson seemed to know enough to ask about it suggested connections and knowledge that made Marcus very uncomfortable. In the car on the way home, Emma chattered happily about all the things she had seen and done during the day. Marcus listened with half his attention while the other half mulled over his encounters with Admiral Richardson. "Daddy," Emma said as they pulled into their apartment complex, "do you think Admiral Richardson is a nice man?" It was an interesting question, and Marcus wasn't sure how to answer it. Admiral Richardson had seemed genuine in his interest in veteran welfare, and his final apology had appeared sincere. But there had been something else beneath the surface, a level of knowledge and persistence that suggested motives beyond simple community outreach. "I think he's probably a good man who wants to help people," Marcus said carefully. "But sometimes, good people can be pushy when they're excited about something." Emma nodded sagely. "Like when I really want you to read me another bedtime story, even when you've already read 3. "Exactly like that," Marcus agreed, smiling at her analogy. That night, after Emma had fallen asleep clutching her new stuffed animal and with her race medal hanging on her bedpost, Marcus sat in his living room thinking about the day's events. He had 3 business cards in his pocket, one from Sarah Martinez, the reporter, one from Dave Morrison at the VA, and one that Admiral Richardson had quietly slipped to him during their final conversation when Emma had been distracted by the butterfly. Marcus pulled out Admiral Richardson's card and examined it for the first time. It was simple and elegant, with just the Admiral's name, phone number, and a single line: "Retired U.S. Navy Special Projects Liaison." Special Projects Liaison was not a standard Navy title. It suggested work with classified programs, black operations, or other sensitive assignments that required specialized security clearances and compartmented access. Marcus set the card on his coffee table and stared at it for a long time. Admiral Richardson's persistent interest in him was starting to make more sense, but it was also becoming more concerning. If the Admiral had connections to special projects and classified programs, then his knowledge of Marcus's background might go much deeper than casual research or community networking. Marcus had worked hard to put his special operations career behind him. He had transitioned cleanly out of the military, settled quietly into civilian life, and focused all his energy on being the best father he could be to Emma. The last thing he wanted was to be pulled back into the world of classified operations and sensitive missions. But as he sat in his quiet apartment, listening to the sounds of Emma sleeping peacefully in the next room, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully constructed civilian life was about to become much more complicated. The next morning arrived with its usual routine. Marcus's alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., and he quietly got dressed for his run without waking Emma. The morning exercise had become an essential part of his daily routine, helping him maintain both physical fitness and mental discipline. The pre-dawn streets of their neighborhood were peaceful and empty, exactly the way Marcus preferred them. He ran a different route each morning, varying his path to maintain an element of unpredictability while staying within a reasonable distance of home in case Emma needed him. This morning's route took him through the downtown area and past the community center where yesterday's Veterans Day event had been held. The parking lot was empty now, with only scattered pieces of litter remaining as evidence of the previous day's festivities. As Marcus ran past the community center, he noticed a dark sedan parked across the street with someone sitting behind the wheel. The vehicle looked out of place in the quiet morning setting, and Marcus's instinctive awareness kicked into high gear. Without breaking stride or showing any obvious sign of concern, Marcus continued his run while mentally cataloging details about the sedan and its occupant. The car was a late-model government vehicle, the kind used by federal agencies for surveillance and official business. The person behind the wheel appeared to be alone and seemed to be watching the community center rather than following Marcus. Marcus completed his normal route and returned home, but the presence of the sedan nagged at him throughout the rest of his morning routine. When he went to wake Emma for breakfast, he found himself checking the street view from her bedroom window, looking for any other signs of unusual activity in their neighborhood. "Daddy, why are you looking out the window like that?" Emma asked sleepily as she climbed out of bed. "Just checking the weather," Marcus replied, though the sky was clearly visible and obviously clear. Emma accepted this explanation without question and padded off to the bathroom to brush her teeth. Marcus continued to feel unsettled as they went through their normal morning routine of breakfast, getting Emma ready for school and preparing for their respective days. As they walked to the school bus stop, Marcus maintained his usual alertness but didn't notice anything unusual. The dark sedan was nowhere to be seen, and their neighborhood appeared completely normal. "Have a great day at school, sweetheart," Marcus said as Emma climbed onto the bus. "You too, Daddy," Emma replied through the bus window as it pulled away. Marcus watched the bus disappear around the corner, then walked back toward their apartment. It was only then that he noticed the dark sedan again. Now parked 2 blocks away, near the entrance to their apartment complex. This time, there was no question that the vehicle was watching him specifically. Marcus felt a familiar combination of alertness and frustration. He had left the world of surveillance and counter-surveillance behind when he retired from the military, and he didn't appreciate having it follow him into his civilian life. Instead of walking directly back to his apartment, Marcus took a deliberately circuitous route through the complex, giving himself time to think and plan. The presence of the sedan suggested that someone was taking a professional interest in him, which meant yesterday's encounter with Admiral Richardson had probably triggered some kind of background investigation or security review. Marcus had nothing to hide in terms of his civilian life. But the attention itself was problematic. If someone was running surveillance on him, it could affect his job, his standing in the community, and most importantly, Emma's safety and privacy. By the time Marcus reached his apartment, he had made a decision. He pulled Admiral Richardson's business card out of his wallet and dialed the number. "Richardson," came the crisp answer after 2 rings. "Admiral, this is Marcus Thompson. We met yesterday at the Veterans Day event." "Mr. Thompson, good to hear from you. I hope you and Emma enjoyed the rest of the festivities." "We did, sir. Thank you. But I'm calling about a different matter. I noticed some unusual activity in my neighborhood this morning, and I'm wondering if it might be related to our conversation yesterday." There was a brief pause before Admiral Richardson responded. "That's an interesting observation. What kind of activity are you referring to?" Marcus could tell from the Admiral's tone that his suspicion was correct. "The kind that suggests someone is taking a professional interest in my daily routine." "I see. Mr. Thompson, would you be available to meet for coffee this morning? I think we might have some things to discuss." Marcus checked his watch. He didn't need to be at the hardware store until noon, which gave him several hours of free time. "Where and when?" "There's a diner called Murphy's about 10 minutes from your location. Do you know it?" Marcus did know it. Murphy's was an old-fashioned diner that served breakfast all day and attracted a mixture of local workers, retirees, and travelers passing through town. It would be a good place for a private conversation without seeming suspicious. "I can be there in 20 minutes, Marcus said. "Perfect. I'll be in the back booth on the left side." As Marcus hung up the phone, he realized that Admiral Richardson had just demonstrated several concerning things. First, the Admiral clearly knew where Marcus lived, since he had been able to suggest a meeting location that was exactly 10 minutes away. Second, Admiral Richardson had not seemed surprised by Marcus's observation about surveillance, which suggested he had been expecting the call. And third, the Admiral had responded immediately to Marcus's request for a meeting, which implied that he had been waiting for Marcus to make contact. Marcus grabbed his jacket and keys, but before leaving the apartment, he made one more phone call to the hardware store to let them know he might be a few minutes late for his shift. The drive to Murphy's gave Marcus time to think about how he wanted to handle the upcoming conversation. Admiral Richardson clearly knew more about Marcus's background than he had initially let on, and the presence of surveillance suggested that Marcus had somehow become involved in something larger than a simple community outreach effort. Marcus parked across the street from the diner and took a moment to scan the area for any signs of additional surveillance or security. He spotted at least 2 other vehicles that could potentially contain watchers, but nothing that definitively suggested a larger operation. Admiral Richardson was indeed sitting in the back booth on the left side of the diner, wearing civilian clothes and reading a newspaper. He looked up as Marcus approached and gestured for him to take the seat across from him. "Thank you for coming," Admiral Richardson said as Marcus sat down. "I appreciate your directness on the phone. I learned a long time ago that beating around the bush usually just wastes time," Marcus replied. "What's going on, Admiral?" Before Admiral Richardson could answer, a waitress approached their table with a coffee pot and 2 mugs. "Coffee for both of you?" she asked cheerfully. Both men nodded, and she filled their mugs before departing to tend to other customers. The brief interruption gave Marcus a moment to study Admiral Richardson more carefully than he had been able to do during the previous day's busy event. In the quieter setting of the diner, Admiral Richardson looked older and more serious than he had at the Veterans Day celebration. There were lines of stress around his eyes, and his manner was more formal and guarded than it had been during their casual encounters. "Mr. Thompson," Admiral Richardson began after the waitress was out of hearing range, "I want to start by acknowledging that our meeting yesterday was not entirely coincidental." Marcus felt his stomach tighten, but he wasn't entirely surprised. The Admiral's persistent interest and knowledge had suggested something more than casual curiosity. "Go on," Marcus said simply. "I've been asked to reach out to certain former Special Operations personnel who have successfully transitioned to civilian life. The purpose is to discuss potential consulting opportunities with government agencies." Marcus leaned back in his seat, processing this information. "Consulting on what?" "Various projects that could benefit from specialized expertise and experience. Nothing that would require you to return to active duty or leave your civilian life behind." The phrase, specialized expertise and experience, was government speak for classified operations and sensitive missions. Marcus had heard similar language many times during his military career, when officials were discussing assignments that couldn't be described in detail over unsecured communications. "Admiral, with all due respect, I left that life behind when I retired. My priority now is raising my daughter and building a stable civilian life." Admiral Richardson nodded as if he had expected this response. "I understand and respect that priority, but consider that some of the threats facing our country today require exactly the kind of expertise you possess. Expertise that can't be easily replaced or replicated." Marcus took a sip of his coffee, buying time to think. The Admiral was being deliberately vague, which suggested that whatever he was discussing involved classified information that couldn't be shared in detail without proper security clearances and need-to-know authorizations. "What kind of consulting are we talking about?" Marcus asked. "Occasional meetings? Travel? Extended deployments?" "That would depend on your interests and availability. Some opportunities might be as simple as reviewing operational plans and providing feedback. Others might involve more hands-on participation." Marcus understood what Admiral Richardson wasn't saying. The government occasionally used former Special Operations personnel as consultants and contractors for missions that required deniability or specialized skills that weren't available within current military units. "Admiral, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in returning to operational work in any capacity. I have a daughter to consider." Admiral Richardson leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more serious. "Mr. Thompson, I want you to understand something. The people I represent are aware of your background, your capabilities, and your current situation. They respect your choice to prioritize your family, but they also believe that your country may need your expertise again." The way he said it carried an undercurrent of both respect and subtle pressure. Marcus recognized the technique from his own military experience. present the request as an honor and a patriotic duty, while implying that refusal might be seen as letting down the team and the country. "What exactly do you know about my background?" Marcus asked directly. Admiral Richardson glanced around the diner to make sure no one was within hearing distance, then spoke very quietly. "I know that you served with distinction in some of the most sensitive operations conducted by our special forces. I know that your record includes missions that remain classified at the highest levels. And I know that your call sign reflected your unique abilities in the field." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. His call sign, Iron Ghost, was indeed classified and should not be available to anyone without the highest security clearances and specific need-to-know authorization. "How do you know that?" Marcus asked, his voice equally quiet, but with an edge of warning. "Because the people I represent have access to that information, and they remember the value of exceptional operators like yourself." Admiral Richardson's answer confirmed Marcus's worst fears. He was dealing with someone who had connections to the intelligence community and access to classified personnel files that should have been sealed after his retirement. "Admiral, I need to be very clear about something," Marcus said, leaning forward and meeting the older man's eyes directly. "I retired from the military specifically to leave that world behind. I have no interest in consulting, contracting, or any other form of involvement with government operations. My answer is no, and it's not going to change." Admiral Richardson studied Marcus's face for a long moment, as if weighing whether to continue pressing or accept the refusal. "I understand your position," he said finally, "but I want you to consider that your skills and experience represent a national asset that can't be easily replaced." "My daughter represents a personal responsibility that can't be replaced at all," Marcus replied firmly. Admiral Richardson nodded slowly, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a small, plain business card. "I respect your decision. But if circumstances ever change, or if you ever feel that your country needs your specific expertise, I want you to have a way to reach people who understand your value." Marcus looked at the card without taking it. Unlike Admiral Richardson's previous card, this one contained only a phone number with no name or organization identification. "I won't be needing that," Marcus said. Admiral Richardson placed the card on the table between them anyway. "Keep it or throw it away. That's your choice. But understand that some threats to our national security are complex enough to require the involvement of people with your particular background and abilities." Marcus stood up from the booth, leaving money on the table to cover his coffee. "Admiral, I hope you understand that this conversation doesn't change anything. I'm a civilian now, with civilian responsibilities and priorities." "I do understand," Admiral Richardson replied, remaining seated. "And I hope you understand that some responsibilities transcend individual choices." As Marcus walked away from the table, he could feel Admiral Richardson's eyes following him. The conversation had confirmed his worst suspicions about the previous day's encounters and the surveillance he had noticed that morning. Marcus was being recruited for some kind of classified operation or consulting arrangement, and the people behind it had access to his most sensitive military records. The fact that they knew his call sign meant they had connections at the highest levels of the intelligence community. Walking back to his car, Marcus found himself automatically checking for surveillance again. The dark sedan was gone, but he spotted two other vehicles that could potentially contain watchers. He was definitely still under observation, which meant that his refusal to cooperate had not ended their interest in him. Marcus drove to work with his mind racing, constantly checking his rear-view mirror for signs of surveillance. The conversation with Admiral Richardson had revealed the true scope of what he was dealing with, and none of it was good news for his carefully constructed civilian life. The hardware store where Marcus worked was a family-owned business that had been serving the community for over 40 years. Marcus had been hired 3 years earlier by the owner, Bill Patterson, who was a Vietnam veteran himself and understood the challenges of military to civilian transition. "Morning, Marcus," Bill called out as Marcus entered through the back door. "How was the Veterans Day event yesterday?" "Good," Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice normal. "Emma really enjoyed the fun run." Bill nodded approvingly. "That little girl of yours is something special. Always polite when she comes in here with you and smart as a whip." Marcus smiled genuinely for the first time that morning. Emma was indeed special, and she was the reason he had to find a way to handle this situation without allowing it to disrupt their lives. The morning passed slowly as Marcus helped customers with various home improvement projects, loaded lumber for contractors, and restocked shelves. The routine work helped calm his mind and gave him time to think through his options. By lunchtime, Marcus had reached several conclusions. First, Admiral Richardson and whoever he represented were not going to simply accept Marcus's refusal and leave him alone. Second, the surveillance meant they were serious about their interest in him, and they probably had resources far beyond what a single retired veteran could effectively resist. Third, his best chance of protecting Emma and maintaining their civilian life was to find out exactly what these people wanted and determine if there was a way to satisfy their needs without compromising his principles or priorities. During his lunch break, Marcus called Emma's school to check on her day. It was something he did occasionally when work stress or other concerns made him want to confirm that she was safe and happy. "She's doing great, Mr. Thompson," her teacher assured him. "We just finished a science project about butterflies, and Emma was very excited to share her face painting from yesterday as part of her presentation." Marcus smiled at the image of Emma incorporating her Veterans Day face painting into a school project. Her ability to find joy and excitement in simple things was one of the qualities he most admired about her. "Thank you for letting me check in," Marcus said. "I'll see her when she gets home this afternoon." The afternoon at work passed more quickly than the morning, but Marcus remained distracted and alert. Every time the front door chimed to announce a customer, he found himself checking to see who was entering. Every time a vehicle parked outside for more than a few minutes, he noted its description and occupants. Bill Patterson noticed Marcus's increased vigilance and approached him during a quiet moment in the late afternoon. "You seem a little on edge today," Bill observed. "Everything okay at home?" Marcus considered how much to share. Bill was a good man and a fellow veteran who might understand the situation, but Marcus also didn't want to involve innocent people in whatever was developing around him. "Just some unexpected attention related to my military background," Marcus said carefully. "Nothing serious, but it's got me thinking about things I'd rather leave in the past." Bill nodded knowingly. "I get that. Sometimes people want to make a big deal out of service when all you want is to move forward quietly. You let me know if you need any time off to deal with whatever it is." "Thank you, Bill. I appreciate that." Marcus's shift ended at 5 p.m. and he drove straight to Emma's school to pick her up from after-school care. She came running out of the building with her backpack bouncing and a huge smile on her face. "Daddy, guess what happened today?" "Tell me everything," Marcus said, helping her into her booster seat. As they drove home, Emma chattered enthusiastically about her butterfly presentation, a new friend she had made during recess, and a book about horses that her teacher had recommended for their next reading assignment. Marcus listened carefully, letting her excitement and innocence wash over him like a protective shield against the stress of his morning. "Are we going to run tomorrow morning?" Emma asked as they pulled into their apartment complex. "Absolutely," Marcus replied. "Same time, same routine." But even as he said it, Marcus was scanning the area for signs of surveillance. The dark sedan was back, parked in a different location, but clearly watching their building. That evening, after Emma had finished her homework and they had eaten dinner together, Marcus sat her down for a conversation he had been dreading. "Emma, I want to talk to you about something important." "Am I in trouble?" Emma asked immediately, her eyes widening with concern. No, sweetheart, you're not in trouble at all. But I want to make sure you understand some safety rules that we might need to follow for a while. Emma nodded seriously, sensing the gravity of the conversation. If anyone you don't know ever approaches you at school or anywhere else and asks questions about me or our family, I want you to tell them you can't talk to strangers and walk away immediately. Okay, Emma said. But what if they're nice people? Like the Admiral yesterday. Marcus had been hoping she wouldn't make that connection, but Emma was too perceptive to miss it. Even if they seem nice, sweetheart. Adults who need to ask children questions should always talk to parents first. Emma considered this for a moment. Are you worried about something, Daddy? Marcus chose his words carefully. Sometimes when people find out about someone's job history, they get curious and want to ask lots of questions. Most of the time it's harmless, but I want to make sure we're both safe and that our privacy is protected. Like how you don't like talking about the big boats? Exactly like that. Some things should stay private, and some people need to learn to respect that. Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense to her 7-year-old worldview. Should I tell my teacher about this? That's a good idea, Marcus agreed. You can tell Mrs. Henderson that if any adults ask her questions about our family, she should ask them to contact me directly. That night, after Emma was asleep, Marcus sat in his living room with Admiral Richardson's plain business card on the coffee table in front of him. He had been avoiding looking at it since bringing it home, but he knew he needed to make a decision about how to handle the situation. Marcus had 3 basic options. He could continue to ignore the recruitment attempts and hope they eventually gave up, but the surveillance suggested they were prepared to be persistent. He could pack up and move somewhere else with Emma, but that would mean disrupting her school, leaving behind the life they had built, and potentially having to repeat the process if they were tracked down again. Or he could call the number on the card and find out exactly what these people wanted, with the goal of determining if there was a way to satisfy their needs without returning to operational work. Marcus picked up his phone and dialed the number. Yes, came a simple answer after one ring. This is Marcus Thompson. I believe Admiral Richardson gave you my name. Mr. Thompson, thank you for calling. We've been hoping to hear from you. The voice was professional, gender-neutral, and gave no indication of location or organizational affiliation. I want to be clear from the beginning, Marcus said. I'm not interested in returning to operational work or any kind of active duty consulting, but I'm willing to listen to what you have to say. We understand your position, and we respect your priorities. Would you be available for a meeting tomorrow evening to discuss a proposal that might address both your concerns and our needs? Marcus glanced toward Emma's bedroom door. What kind of meeting? A brief presentation that would explain the nature of our interest in your expertise without requiring any commitment on your part. Where? A private dining room at the Marriott downtown, 7 p.m., just you and 2 representatives from our organization. Marcus knew the hotel. It was upscale, public, and safe. The kind of location chosen for meetings that needed to appear legitimate while remaining private. Will Admiral Richardson be there? No. Admiral Richardson served as our initial contact, but any further discussions would be with the principals involved in the actual project. Marcus considered the offer. Meeting with them didn't commit him to anything, but it would give him information he needed to make an informed decision about how to handle the situation. I'll be there, Marcus said finally, but I want to be clear that this is a fact-finding meeting only. Understood completely. Room 347. Please come alone. The call ended, leaving Marcus staring at the phone and wondering if he had just made a serious mistake. But he couldn't protect Emma from something he didn't understand, and he couldn't build a defense against people whose capabilities and intentions remained unknown. The next day passed slowly. Marcus went through his normal routine, morning run with Emma, taking her to school, working at the hardware store. But everything felt different now that he knew he was heading toward some kind of confrontation or negotiation with his past. The surveillance was still present, but less obvious, suggesting that his agreement to the meeting had reduced their concern about him disappearing or taking other evasive action. Emma seemed to sense that something was different, but she accepted Marcus's explanation that he had a work meeting that evening and would be home late. Mrs. Patterson, Bill's wife, had agreed to stay with Emma, something she had done occasionally in the past when Marcus had evening obligations. "Be good for Mrs. Patterson," Marcus told Emma as he prepared to leave for the meeting. "I always am," Emma replied with a grin. "Are you nervous about your meeting?" Kids were incredibly perceptive, Marcus reflected. "A little bit, but sometimes you have to have difficult conversations to solve problems. Like when I had to tell Mrs. Henderson about Tommy pulling my hair." "Exactly like that, sweetheart." Marcus arrived at the Marriott 15 minutes early and used the time to scout the hotel layout, identify exit routes, and assess the general security situation. It was another old habit from his military days, but one that had proven valuable during his transition to civilian life. Room 347 was a small conference room with a round table, comfortable chairs, and a view of the downtown area through tall windows. When Marcus knocked on the door at exactly 7 p.m., it was opened by a woman in her 40s wearing a conservative business suit. "Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming. I'm Janet Morrison, and this is my colleague, David Chen." The man standing beside the table was Asian American, probably in his 50s, also dressed in business attire. Both of them had the professional demeanor and alert bearing that Marcus associated with intelligence personnel. "Please, have a seat," Janet Morrison said, gesturing toward the chair across from where she and David Chen were sitting. Marcus sat down but remained alert and ready to leave if the conversation took any direction he didn't like. "Mr. Thompson," Janet Morrison began, "we want to start by thanking you for your service to our country, particularly your contributions to some of our most sensitive national security operations." "You're welcome," Marcus replied simply. David Chen leaned forward slightly. "We also want to acknowledge that we understand your current priorities and your desire to maintain your civilian life. We're not here to ask you to abandon those priorities." "What are you here to ask me to do?" Janet Morrison opened a thin folder that had been sitting on the table in front of her. "We're facing a situation that requires very specific expertise that matches your particular background and experience." "What kind of situation?" "Without going into classified details, we're dealing with a target who has extensive training in counter-surveillance and evasion techniques. Standard law enforcement and intelligence approaches have been unsuccessful." Marcus could see where this was heading. "You want someone who thinks like your target." "Exactly," David Chen confirmed. "Someone who understands the mindset and methods of highly trained operatives." "What would my involvement entail?" Janet Morrison pulled a single sheet of paper from the folder and placed it on the table where Marcus could read it. "Consultation only, reviewing intelligence reports, assessing operational plans, providing insights into potential target behavior and responses." Marcus read the document quickly. It was a consulting contract that specified a 6-month engagement with compensation that was significantly higher than his annual salary at the hardware store. "All work would be conducted remotely or at locations within driving distance of your home," David Chen added. "No travel, no deployment, no separation from your daughter." "And if I say no?" Janet Morrison and David Chen exchanged a glance before Morrison answered. "Then we continue to pursue other options and hope they prove effective." It wasn't exactly a threat, but it wasn't a complete dismissal of consequences either. Marcus understood that if he refused to help and their other options failed, there might be national security implications that could indirectly affect his own safety and that of other civilians. "I need to think about this," Marcus said. "Of course," Morrison replied. "But we would need an answer within 48 hours. The situation we're dealing with is time-sensitive." Marcus stood up from the table. "I'll give you an answer tomorrow night." As he walked back to his car, Marcus felt the weight of a decision that could fundamentally change his life again. The consulting work itself didn't sound unreasonable, and the compensation would provide much better financial security for Emma's future. But Marcus had learned long ago that government consulting agreements rarely stayed as simple as they initially appeared. What started as remote analysis often escalated into field work, and field work had a way of becoming dangerous very quickly. The drive home gave Marcus time to process what he had learned. The people pursuing him were clearly from a high-level intelligence agency, probably CIA or a similar organization. They had a specific operational need that matched his background, and they were prepared to be flexible about how he contributed to their mission. Most importantly, they seemed genuine about allowing him to maintain his civilian life and his role as Emma's father. The question was whether Marcus could trust that commitment if circumstances changed or if the operation became more complex than anticipated. When Marcus arrived home, Emma was already in her pajamas and ready for bed. Mrs. Patterson reported that Emma had been well-behaved, had finished her homework, and had spent the evening reading her new horse book. "How was your meeting, Daddy?" Emma asked as Marcus tucked her into bed. "Productive," Marcus replied honestly. "The people I met with made me an interesting offer." "What kind of offer?" Marcus considered how much to explain. "A job that would let me work from home sometimes and make more money to help pay for things like your college education." Emma's eyes lit up. "That sounds good. Would you still work at the hardware store too?" "I'm not sure yet, sweetheart. I have to think about all the details before I decide. Will you still have time to run with me in the mornings?" "Absolutely," Marcus said firmly. "That's not negotiable, no matter what job I have." Emma smiled contentedly. "Then I think you should take the job that pays more money." Marcus laughed at her straightforward logic. "I'll definitely consider your recommendation." After Emma fell asleep, Marcus called Bill Patterson to discuss his situation in general terms. Bill was not only his employer, but had become a friend and mentor during Marcus's transition to civilian life. "Bill, I've been offered a consulting opportunity that would provide better income, but might require reducing my hours at the store." "Military-related consulting?" Bill asked perceptively. "Yes, sir. Nothing operational. Just analysis and planning work." Bill was quiet for a moment before responding. "Marcus, you're a good man and a valuable employee, but I've always known that someone with your background and abilities was probably overqualified for loading lumber and mixing paint." "I like the work," Marcus said honestly, "and I appreciate the flexibility you've given me with Emma's schedule." "That flexibility isn't going anywhere," Bill assured him. "If you want to take on some consulting work and reduce your store hours, we can make that work. Part-time employees are better than no employees, especially good ones." Marcus felt relieved that he wouldn't have to choose completely between his current job and the consulting opportunity. Maintaining some connection to the hardware store would provide stability and normalcy for both himself and Emma. The next morning's run felt different to Marcus. Instead of simply maintaining his physical conditioning, he found himself thinking tactically about routes, timing, and potential vulnerability points. It was a mental shift back toward his military mindset that he wasn't entirely comfortable with. Emma noticed the change in his demeanor. "You're being very quiet this morning, Daddy." "Just thinking about some work decisions," Marcus replied. "Is it about the job with more money?" "Yes, sweetheart. Sometimes adult decisions are complicated because there are lots of things to consider." Emma nodded sagely. "Like how I had to think about whether to try out for the school play even though it meant less time for reading." "Exactly like that. What did you decide about the play?" "I decided to try out because new experiences are important, even if they're a little scary." Marcus smiled at his daughter's wisdom. She had unconsciously provided him with exactly the perspective he needed to make his own decision. That evening, Marcus called the number on the plain business card. "Yes, came the same professional voice as before. "This is Marcus Thompson. I've made my decision." "We're listening." "I'll accept the consulting arrangement with 3 non-negotiable conditions." "What conditions?" "First, all work must be conducted during school hours or after Emma is asleep. My parenting responsibilities take priority over everything else." "Understood." "Second, if the scope of work expands beyond consultation and analysis, the agreement terminates immediately." "Acceptable." "Third, my identity and location remain classified. No public acknowledgement, no media attention, no recognition that could compromise my civilian life." "That's already built into our standard operating procedures." Marcus took a deep breath. "Then we have an agreement." "Excellent. You'll receive initial briefing materials tomorrow morning. Welcome back to service, Iron Ghost." The use of his call sign sent a chill down Marcus's spine, but he had committed now. "When do I start?" "Your first assignment is already waiting." 2 weeks later, Marcus had settled into a routine that surprised him with its manageability. The consulting work arrived via encrypted email in the form of intelligence reports, surveillance photos, and tactical assessments that needed his expert analysis. The target they were pursuing was indeed someone with extensive special operations training, apparently a former Russian Spetsnaz operative who had gone rogue and was selling classified information to the highest bidders. Marcus's job was to predict the target's likely behavior, identify weaknesses in his operational security, and suggest strategies for tracking and capturing him. It was intellectually challenging work that drew on all of Marcus's training and experience without requiring him to leave home or put himself in physical danger. The compensation was exactly as promised, and Marcus was able to maintain his reduced schedule at the hardware store while being present for all of Emma's important activities. The surveillance had disappeared completely after Marcus accepted the consulting agreement, suggesting that his cooperation had satisfied whatever security concerns had prompted it initially. Emma had noticed that Marcus sometimes worked on his laptop in the evenings after she went to bed, but she accepted his explanation that he was helping some people solve difficult problems. "Are they problems like the ones you used to solve on the big boats?" she asked one morning during their run. "Similar types of problems," Marcus replied carefully. "But now, I solve them from our kitchen table instead of traveling far away." "That's much better," Emma declared. "Kitchen table problems don't give you bad dreams." Marcus realized that Emma was right. The consulting work, while serious and important, didn't carry the emotional weight and personal danger of his previous military assignments. He was contributing his expertise without having to relive the traumatic aspects of his operational experience. 3 months into the consulting arrangement, Marcus received a call that changed everything. "Mr. Thompson, this is Janet Morrison. We need to schedule an urgent in-person meeting." "What's the nature of the urgency?" Marcus asked, immediately alert. "The target has made contact with someone in your local area. We believe he may be conducting surveillance on you." Marcus felt his blood go cold. The one thing he had feared most about accepting the consulting work was the possibility that it could bring danger close to Emma. "What kind of surveillance?" "We're not entirely certain, but there have been indicators that suggest he's attempting to identify and locate the source of the analysis that's been frustrating his operations." Marcus was already moving toward Emma's bedroom to check on her as he talked. "How immediate is the threat?" "Unknown, but we're taking precautions. Can you meet us in 2 hours?" Marcus looked at his sleeping daughter and felt the full weight of his decision to return to this world, even in a limited capacity. "Where?" "Same location as before." "And Mr. Thompson?" "Yes?" "You might want to consider temporary relocation until we resolve this situation." Marcus hung up the phone and stood in Emma's doorway, watching her sleep peacefully, unaware that their carefully constructed civilian life might be about to change dramatically once again. For the first time since retiring from the military, Marcus found himself wondering if the skills that had earned him the call sign Iron Ghost might be needed for more than just consulting work. The meeting at the Marriott was tense and urgent. Janet Morrison and David Chen were accompanied by a third person, a security specialist, who immediately began discussing threat assessment and protective protocols. The target, who we're calling Kozlov, has demonstrated sophisticated surveillance capabilities, Morrison explained. We believe he's identified patterns in our operations that have led him to suspect the involvement of a specialized consultant. How could he have traced that back to me? Marcus asked. David Chen pulled out a series of surveillance photos. Kozlov has been conducting reconnaissance in 3 different areas where our operations have been active. One of those areas is within 50 miles of your location. Marcus studied the photos, which showed a lean, bearded man in his 40s conducting what appeared to be professional surveillance activities. Our concern, the security specialist added, is that Kozlov's background includes targeted elimination of individuals he perceives as threats to his operations. You're saying he might come after me directly? It's a possibility we have to consider, Morrison replied, which is why we're recommending immediate relocation for you and your daughter. Marcus felt the familiar sensation of his civilian world colliding with his military past. For how long? Until we can locate and neutralize Kozlov. Potentially several weeks. Marcus thought about Emma's school, her friends, their routine, their life. What are my alternatives? The security specialist leaned forward. Mr. Thompson, given your background, you could potentially serve as the primary asset in tracking and apprehending Kozlov, rather than just consulting on the operation. There it was. The escalation Marcus had feared from the beginning. What had started as remote consulting was becoming a request for him to return to operational work. That wasn't part of our agreement, Marcus said firmly. Circumstances have changed, Morrison replied. Kozlov's activities have made this personal. You're no longer just a consultant. You're a potential target. Marcus stood up from the table. I need time to think about this. Time is something we may not have, the security specialist warned. Every day that Kozlov remains operational increases the risk to you and your family. As Marcus drove home through the quiet streets of his neighborhood, he realized that his attempt to maintain a foot in both worlds had failed. The consulting work had inevitably pulled him back toward the life he had tried to leave behind, and now Emma was potentially at risk because of choices he had made. When he arrived home, Marcus found Mrs. Patterson reading in the living room while Emma slept. "How was your meeting?" she asked. "Complicated," Marcus replied. "Mrs. Patterson, would you be available to stay with Emma for a few days if needed? There might be some travel required for this consulting work." "Of course, dear. Emma's no trouble at all." After Mrs. Patterson left, Marcus sat in his kitchen staring at the encrypted laptop that had become his link to his former world. The consulting work had seemed like a reasonable compromise, a way to use his skills without returning to the dangers of operational life. But Marcus had forgotten one of the fundamental rules of special operations. There was no such thing as limited involvement. Once you were part of a mission, the mission had a way of claiming all of you. The next morning, Emma noticed Marcus's distraction immediately. "Daddy, you're being very quiet again." "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm thinking about some difficult work problems." "Are they kitchen table problems or big boat problems?" Marcus paused in his running, struck by the perceptiveness of Emma's question. The consulting work had started as kitchen table problems, but Kozlov's surveillance had transformed them into something much more serious. "They're becoming big boat problems," Marcus admitted. Emma stopped running and looked up at him with serious 7-year-old eyes. "Are the big boat problems going to take you away from me?" Marcus knelt down to Emma's eye level, taking her small hands in his larger ones. "Emma, I want you to listen to me very carefully. No matter what happens, no matter what problems I have to solve, you are the most important thing in my life. I will never voluntarily leave you. But what if the problems make you leave? Then I will solve them as quickly as possible and come back to you. Emma nodded solemnly, apparently satisfied with this promise. Can we go home now? I want to have extra time for breakfast. As they walked back toward their apartment, Marcus made his final decision about how to handle the Kozlov situation. He would not relocate Emma or disrupt her life. He would not wait passively for threats to materialize, and he would not allow others to define the terms of his involvement. Marcus Thompson had spent 12 years as one of the most effective special operations soldiers in the U.S. military. Kozlov might be skilled, but he had made the mistake of threatening the one thing Marcus would kill or die to protect. It was time for the Iron Ghost to emerge from retirement. That afternoon, Marcus called Janet Morrison. I've made my decision about how to handle the Kozlov situation. What decision? I'm going to find him and eliminate the threat. Mr. Thompson, that's not what we're asking you to do. It's what needs to be done. Kozlov made this personal when he brought the operation into my neighborhood. I'm going to end it before it can affect my daughter. There was a pause before Morrison responded. If you're serious about this, we'll need to discuss operational parameters and support requirements. I'm completely serious, but I do this my way, on my timeline, with my methods. Understood. When can we meet to plan the operation? Marcus looked toward Emma's bedroom, where she was peacefully doing homework. Tonight, after my daughter is asleep, it's time for Iron Ghost to go hunting.